So guys, just about every time I put out a Hell Let Loose or a Postscriptum video these days, you guys always ask me what's the difference or what one's better or something like that. And so today, finally, we're going to put these games head to head and we're going to try and answer that question once and for all. So guys, this is BillyEatWorld again, and let's find out. Alright guys, welcome to the video, and just before we start I want to give away a few codes that you might remember I mentioned I'd be giving away in the last few videos. And well, I've got one Hell Let Loose code and one Postscriptum code to give away today, and I'm happy to say that they'll go to Ronnie Lava and Mysticism88 respectively, so thanks guys for entering and I'll be in touch very soon. Now, unfortunately, if you missed out on these ones, I actually don't have any more of these codes left, but what I do have, though, is a couple of Insurgency Sandstorm codes that I'm going to be giving away in the next few weeks. So if you're watching this video, then there's a good chance you're probably into that game as well. Head over and follow me on Twitter at BillyEatWorld, and of course, keep an eye out in the next few videos because I'll have more info on the giveaways in them. Alright, so with that out of the way guys, let's get into it. And before we start ripping these games apart, probably what I think we should do is talk about what they are and what they have in common. And for a start, well, you should know that they're both large-scale team-based World War II tactical shooters set in Western Europe around 1944. Not just that, but under the hood, they both run on the Unreal 4 engine. They're both made by indie dev teams, and they're both built with a player-driven design philosophy. And also, they're both clearly trying to do the Project Reality thing, which if you didn't already know, is a legendary tactical shooter from the mid-2000s, which started out as a mod for Battlefield 2. So in other words, if you're familiar with Project Reality or any other PR-style clones like Squad, for example, well, you're going to be right at home. But if you're not, though, well, basically what you can expect is slow movement, basically no HUD, a very fast time to kill, and class systems that force you to work as a team to survive. Also, I should mention, if you're familiar with Battlefield-style maps, well, your average Hell Let Loose map or PS map is multiple times bigger, which means you're going to be doing a lot of walking and there's going to be quite a bit of time between engagements. And here's the big thing you need to know: you don't spawn on objectives or team members in these games. Squad leaders can place spawn points and from there build fortifications, and in both games there's logistic systems in place that govern how those systems work. Now, with that out of the way, that's probably a good point to stop and really start to get into these games and figure out where they fit in the tactical shooter spectrum. Because so far, you can probably see that both of these games aren't your average FPS games. They're both trying to be authentic and realistic, but not always to the same degree. For example, a good way to sum up Postscriptum is that it's not trying to be a first-person shooter, it's actually trying to be a World War II military simulator. Whereas on the other hand, even though it's still pretty authentic, Hell Let Loose, you can tell, focuses a little bit more on the gameplay experience rather than just the immersion of being in the World War II theme. So what does that actually mean, and what does it feel like in game? Well, obviously when you boot up Postscriptum, the first thing you should be prepared for is to deal with guns that handle a lot more realistically. And not just that, but get ready to get punished for doing things that aren't natural, like for example running while crouched or crawling. And I know that kind of sounds weird, but it's true, it actually drains your stamina. Also, I should mention that even though there's a suppression mechanic that'll seriously affect you in both of these games, once again, it's noticeably tougher in Postscriptum. And look, that's only just scratching the surface of the core gameplay. There's a ton of other points I could make here as well, but let's just say that Hell Let Loose has a lower skill cap. It's not arcadey by any means, but it's obviously a lot easier to jump into. Now, as well as in the core gameplay, the other big way you can see this difference is when it comes to the map design. Because even though both games are inspired by real historical locations, once again, Hell Let Loose's maps are just that little bit easier to jump into and a bit more forgiving. Whereas on the other hand, Postscriptum's maps are busier and more detailed, there's more objects to use for cover, and you can hide in just about every building and bush. Which, I mean, might sound like a good thing, right? But in reality, it's actually pretty annoying because it means that you'll almost never know where you're being shot from, and obviously that creates a much more campy meta. With that being said, though, I do have to say that Postscriptum does seem to have a bit better visibility. Often in Hell Let Loose, you find yourself shooting at movement or silhouettes because the person is just blending into the background. But I mean, apart from that, though, in terms of the general quality of the graphics, well, I honestly think both of these games are not quite as good as, say, a AAA game like Battlefield 5, but definitely on par with each other. In terms of audio, though, well, there's probably a few more differences to talk about here. Postscriptum's gun sounds, I think, definitely sound just that little bit better. But on the other hand, though, I think Hell Let Loose's vehicle sounds probably sound a little bit better as well. So once again, I guess it just comes down to which one of those you care about the most. Now, moving on, I know the nuts and bolts are so important, but let's get away from that stuff for a second. Let's have a look at the difference between these games in terms of how they handle the World War II theme. And like I said, obviously both games are trying to be authentic and respectful to the source material, but once again, Postscriptum just is that little bit more extreme. Here's a good example. Check this out. This is the class selection screen in Postscriptum, and as you can see, if you're an English speaker, well, bad luck. All the class names are actually in German and there's no translations. And not just that, but as you can see, the Waffen SS is actually a playable faction, which, I mean, sure is historically accurate, but I mean, obviously, that's going to be pretty controversial, right? With that being said, though, if you do have a moral objection to playing a video game, say, as a Nazi, well, actually you don't have to. One of the best things, in my opinion, about PS is the ability to select your team and faction at the start of every round, which I should add also effectively scrambles the teams. On the other hand, though, Hell Let Loose only allows you to select your team when you first join the server, and from then on you can choose to switch teams after a fairly long cooldown period. Which, I mean, is better than, say, in Battlefield 5, which doesn't even have a team switch feature, but unfortunately it does mean that teams aren't scrambled from round to round, and they can, and often do, get pretty unbalanced. And that, I think, is a great segue to get into the topic of balancing, because obviously this is a huge thing in any FPS game, and I really think there's a lot to talk about when it comes to these two games. And look, I know we've talked for most of this video about how Postscriptum is more realistic or whatever, but I do have to admit that when it comes to balancing, both of these games do prefer authenticity. For example, like I said before, these games both have a super fast, realistic time to kill. You're looking at about a 1 to 2 shot kill for almost every weapon in the game, including pistols, and you do have to bandage yourself up, which takes ages if you get shot. So as a result, automatic weapons can be stupidly powerful compared to, say, bolt-action rifles, and so rather than just balancing weapons like they would in, say, a game like Battlefield 5, what they do in these games instead is limit the weapons by classes. For example, this is how it works. Let me just set the scene. In a game with literally almost no zoom optics, sniper rifles are obviously going to be insane, right? So both games make these roles super hard to get into. And not just that, but things like assault rifles and machine guns, well, they're restricted to specialist classes as well, which is probably a bit of a red flag if you're someone who likes to chop and change with your weapon choices. And I mean, sure, you can try and quickly grab those specialized roles at the start of a round to get the better weapons, but as a trade-off, those roles come with the responsibility to support your squad. And like I said before, these are serious team-based games, and if you don't stick with your squad and follow orders using these roles, well, don't be surprised if you get kicked out of your squad. Now, we're getting to the end of the video now, and I think we've covered most of the in-game differences, but the last thing I really want to talk about in this video is the long-term viability of each game, because obviously that's really important. Because like I said before, both of these games are very large-scale shooters. Postscriptum is currently an 80-player cap, and Hell Let Loose is 100, so obviously they're not going to feel right if the player base isn't there to support them. And being that both games are indie games and fairly niche to begin with, you're just not going to get more than a few thousand players active on either game on a daily basis anyway. So essentially, both games are going to need long-term support and regular content updates to survive, which I've got to admit is something that Postscriptum has had a big issue with in the last year or so. The Hell Let Loose dev team, on the other hand, well, they put out regular dev posts every week, and every month or two we get a new patch or a major update with new content. Whereas last week, more than a year after launch, Postscriptum only just got its first major update announcement. It's getting 3 new maps and a French faction in the next few months. And I mean, of course, the devs can only get things out as fast as they can, but the fact is, in the live service world that we now live in, the active player base of Postscriptum has been slowly dropping off. Whereas on the other hand, Hell Let Loose only keeps on growing. And honestly, I really think unless PS picks up its pace a bit when it comes to updates, then that trend is probably going to continue. But anyway, to finish up, bearing all of that in mind, look, if you're anything like me and you're already into hardcore shooters, well, honestly, I really don't think you're going to regret buying either of these games. I mean, sure, each one does have its pros and cons, but honestly, I reckon if one game wasn't there, I'd probably be happy enough playing the other one instead, and that really says a lot about how similar these two games are. But in saying that though, just say you're new to hardcore shooters and you're coming from a Battlefield or a Call of Duty backgrounds, well, I definitely recommend you pick up Hell Let Loose first. It's still very challenging, but like I said, it's just a little bit more forgiving. There's more action, there's more kill streaks, and the player base is a little bit more laid back as well. On the other hand though, I can totally understand if you're already a Project Reality or a Squad fan that you might just want to go and jump straight into Postscriptum. Because like I said, it can be frustrating at times, but honestly I just can't think of another World War II FPS game that's even as close to being as authentic, and that matters a lot to a lot of people. And look, I should say that like I said before, Hell Let Loose is getting updated all the time, and so maybe in a few years I might even change my mind about a lot of the points I've made in this video. But honestly, I think realism is always something Postscriptum is going to have up its sleeve, and so if that sounds like something you're interested in, well, it might be the perfect game for you. But anyway guys, that just about wraps up this quick video, so as always, make sure you let me know what you think in the comment section down below. And of course, please let me know which one of these games you think is better. Why do you prefer one or the other? Let me know down below. As always though, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and please feel free to check out the links in the description if you want to see any more of these videos. And also don't forget you can find my Twitter and Discord links down there as well if you want to keep in touch. And as always, until next time, see you later and have a good one.